The judge had barely opened my file when the whole mood in that courtroom changed. Not dramatically, not like television. It was smaller than that. More real. He stopped turning pages. That was the first thing. Then he leaned back slowly in his chair and adjusted his glasses while rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows behind him. Nobody spoke. Even Tyler's lawyer finally shut up. The judge looked toward the court officer near the door. "I want non-essential personnel removed from the courtroom," he said calmly, "and I'd like representatives from the lending parties to remain available." That's when my wife finally looked at me. Not angry, not confident, scared. And sitting there in that hard wooden chair in downtown Indianapolis, listening to the old heating vents rattle overhead, I realized something strange. For the first time in nearly a year, I wasn't the nervous one anymore. My name's Richard Hale. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life I drove trucks. Not because I loved it, because it paid the bills. I started with one used Freightliner back in 1993, paid $14,000 cash for it after borrowing money from my uncle and selling a fishing boat I couldn't afford to keep anyway. The sleeper cab heater barely worked that first winter. I still remember waking up outside Terre Haute with ice frozen inside the windshield. I slept wearing gloves some nights, ate gas station sausage biscuits that tasted like cardboard, learned how to repair frozen brake lines myself because I couldn't pay mechanics every time something broke. You do enough winters in the Midwest, your hands stop looking normal after a while. Mine still carry scars across the knuckles. By the time I turned 50, I finally had something solid. 23 trucks, contracts running freight through Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Kentucky. Nothing flashy. Mostly warehouse goods, farm equipment, machine parts. The kind of business nobody notices unless it stops working. And honestly, that was fine with me. I wasn't trying to get rich anymore. I just wanted peace. A smaller workload. Maybe retire in 5 or 6 years. Spend more time fishing. Maybe help my daughter Emily and her little boy someday with college money. That was the plan anyway. Then Tyler happened. Now technically, Tyler wasn't my son. He was Denise's son from her first marriage. 31 years old. Good-looking kid, I'll give him that. Sharp smile, knew how to talk fast, always smelled expensive somehow even when he was broke. Especially when he was broke. I met Denise 11 years ago at a church fundraiser in Carmel. We were both divorced, both lonely in ways people don't like admitting after 50. She made life feel warm again. That matters more than people realize at our age. She laughed easily, made homemade chicken and dumplings when I worked late, rubbed my shoulders when my back locked up after long drives. Every morning she'd set my blood pressure pills beside my coffee mug before I even sat down. You start trusting somebody from little things like that. That's the dangerous part. Tyler acted respectful in the beginning, called me sir, helped around the warehouse occasionally, told people he admired what I built. I believed him. God help me, I really did. Then over time the requests started. First it was small. Hey Richard, could you help me with rent this month? Then, my car payment's late. Then, I just need a little startup money. Every conversation somehow ended with my wallet opening. Denise always had a reason. He's trying. He just needs one good opportunity. He didn't have your discipline growing up. Meanwhile, Tyler posted pictures online holding champagne glasses in rooftop bars I knew he couldn't afford. Miami, Scottsdale, Nashville. Always talking about multiple income streams and financial freedom while borrowing money from everybody around him. I remember standing in my warehouse office one February morning while diesel fumes drifted through the loading bay, watching one of Tyler's Instagram videos. He was renting some Lamborghini outside a casino in Florida. The caption said, "Built, not given." I actually laughed out loud at that one. Not because it was funny. Because if I didn't laugh, I probably would have thrown my phone through the wall. Still, I kept helping. That's the embarrassing truth. Not because Tyler deserved it. Because I loved Denise. And because after a certain age, a lot of men become afraid of starting over alone. About 6 months before the lawsuit, Tyler came to me with what he called a real business opportunity. Freight brokerage. He knew enough trucking language from hanging around my company to sound convincing. He said he had investors lined up. Said he just needed help getting contracts moving. One night, Denise brought me coffee and peach pie, while Tyler spread papers across the kitchen table. Mostly routine paperwork, Tyler said casually. I should have read every page carefully. Instead, I skimmed. Signed a few things. Trusted family. Big mistake. A month later, collection calls started hitting my office line. At first, I thought it was some billing error. Then a lender from Cleveland called asking why I defaulted on a commercial obligation worth over $700,000. I nearly dropped the phone. What obligation? That's when everything began unraveling. Loans. Guarantees. LLCs connected to my company name. And somehow, my signatures attached to documents I'd never seen in my life. When I confronted Tyler, he got defensive immediately. You signed the paperwork. No, I told him. I signed support documents. Denise stepped between us before it escalated. He's under pressure, she said quietly. Pressure. Funny word for fraud. After I refused to pay the debt, the lawsuit came fast. Tyler claimed I knowingly backed his business ventures. His lawyer painted me as some cold old man abandoning family after making promises. People looked at me differently after that. Even a few drivers at the yard started whispering. And through all of it, Denise stayed beside her son. Not loudly. That would have been easier. No, she did it quietly. Like she'd already chosen him long before I realized I was losing. Which brings me back to that courtroom. Tyler sat across from me wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first truck payment. He looked confident when the hearing started. But confidence changes fast when truth enters the room. The judge flipped another page in my folder slowly. Then another. Tyler stopped smiling, and Denise finally raised her eyes toward me. I'll never forget that look for the rest of my life, because in that moment, she knew I had found everything. Looking back now, I think the hardest part wasn't losing money. It was realizing how gradually people can train you to ignore your own instincts. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, you know what, I'd love to become an ATM for my family. It happens little by little. One favor at a time. One excuse at a time. One guilt trip wrapped in love. That first year with Denise felt normal, peaceful even. We'd sit on the back porch after dinner, listening to cicadas while she drank sweet tea, and I rested my knees after long drives. She'd ask about my routes. I'd ask about her day at the insurance office in Carmel. Simple stuff. The kind of life I thought I wanted after my first marriage fell apart. I'd already spent years alone by then. Microwave dinners, empty house, television talking to itself in the background while I fell asleep in a recliner. People don't understand how quiet life can get after 50, especially for men. So when Denise came along with her warm laugh and little routines, I held on to that harder than I probably should have. And Tyler knew it. I don't think he planned everything from the beginning. Honestly, I don't. At first, he just acted like a guy trying to figure his life out. He helped around the warehouse occasionally, rode along on deliveries once or twice, talked big about wanting to build something of his own. But there was always another problem. Always another emergency. One night he called around 11. Richard, I'm stranded outside Bloomington. Transmission shot. Another time, my rent check bounced. Then, I can pay you back Friday, I swear. Friday never came. Denise always defended him in the softest voice imaginable. That was her superpower. She never yelled, never demanded. She'd just stand there in the kitchen drying dishes slowly while saying things like, he's embarrassed already. Or, you know how proud he is. Meanwhile, I'm standing there after 14 hours at the yard with grease on my sleeves, handing over another check because I didn't want tension in the house. Funny thing is, older men will tolerate a lot just to keep peace at home. More than we admit, especially after divorce. I remember one night clear as day. Late October. Cold rain outside. I walked into the kitchen around 10:30 after dealing with a breakdown near Terre Haute all evening. Denise had left a plate in the microwave for me. Meatloaf. Mashed potatoes. Still warm. She sat at the kitchen table wearing one of my old sweatshirts while Tyler paced around holding his phone. Bad timing, Tyler muttered. That sentence alone usually meant money. Turns out he owed nearly 12 grand on sports betting apps. $12,000. On football games. I stared at him across the kitchen island, wondering how a grown man could destroy money that fast. I can't keep doing this, I said quietly. Tyler rolled his eyes immediately. You act like I'm asking for $1 million. No, I said. You're asking like it's normal. Denise stepped in before things escalated. He's my son, Richard. There it was again. That sentence. Like motherhood itself erased responsibility. I remember looking at her while the microwave clock blinked 10:47 in the dark kitchen. When does helping stop being helping, I asked. Neither of them answered. A few days later, Tyler posted photos from a rooftop bar in Chicago, holding a bottle of tequila that probably cost $600. I sat in my truck outside Lafayette staring at the picture during a fuel stop. One of my drivers walked past and chuckled. Your boy living good, boss. I forced a smile. But inside, I felt something sour twisting in my stomach, because I knew exactly where that money came from. Things got worse after Tyler discovered social media entrepreneur culture. Suddenly, every conversation sounded like a podcast. Passive income, scaling opportunity, leveraging assets. The kid could barely balance his checking account, but online he acted like Warren Buffett with hair gel. Meanwhile, I was waking up at 4:45 every morning, checking weather reports and dispatch schedules while trying to keep 23 trucks moving through Midwest winters. That's what bothered me most. Not the money, the disrespect toward work itself. Tyler wanted results without sacrifice, wanted the appearance of success without earning stability first. And Denise, she couldn't see it. Or maybe she refused to. Around that time, she started bringing paperwork home more often. Tyler just needs a signature. Tyler just needs temporary backing. Tyler just needs someone lenders trust. I should have slowed down. I know that now. But when somebody hands you forms while pouring your coffee and asking about your blood pressure medication, your guard drops without you realizing it. That's what still bothers me most. Not being tricked. Being comforted while it happened. One evening, she brought me homemade peach pie while Tyler spread documents across the dining room table. Mostly procedural stuff, Tyler said casually. I skimmed a few pages while eating dessert. Business support agreements. Freight brokerage startup. Temporary guarantees. Nothing sounded insane in the moment, especially because Tyler used trucking terminology he'd learned from hanging around my company. Looking back, I think they counted on exhaustion, counted on routine, counted on trust. And they were right. A month later, the collection calls began. Then came the lenders. One afternoon, two men in dark jackets showed up at my warehouse asking about outstanding obligations tied to Hale Transport Logistics. My dispatcher, Manny, pulled me aside afterward. Boss, he said carefully, something feels off here. Manny had worked with me 15 years, quiet guy, former Army mechanic, not dramatic. That's why I listen. What do you mean? He lowered his voice. They knew too much, account numbers, routes, company details. That night I stayed late at the office after everybody left. Rain hit the warehouse roof while trucks hummed quietly outside in the yard. I started going through copies of loan paperwork for the first time carefully. Page after page. Signature after signature. Then I found one that made my chest tighten. At first glance, it looked exactly like mine. But something felt wrong. Too smooth. Too perfect. See, after 30 years signing freight documents in truck stops, warehouses freezing loading docks, your signature gets sloppy in places, small inconsistencies, pressure marks. This signature looked practiced. Like somebody studied it. I pulled out an old tax return from my desk drawer and placed both papers under the lamp. That's when my stomach dropped completely. Whoever copied my name had traced it. And suddenly every quiet moment from the past year started replaying differently in my head. The coffee, the pie, the paperwork, the smiles, all of it. I sat alone in that warehouse office until almost 2 a.m, listening to rain hit the metal roof while realization settled into my bones. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being Denise's husband and become their financial safety net. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in my warehouse office until almost dawn, staring at those signatures, while trucks idled outside waiting for morning dispatch. Every few minutes, I'd convince myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe Tyler copied paperwork wrong. Maybe Denise didn't understand what she signed. Maybe I was overreacting. Funny how your brain fights the truth when your heart isn't ready for it. By 6 a.m, I drove home in freezing rain with a headache pounding behind my eyes. Denise was already awake in the kitchen, wearing slippers and one of those oversized cardigans she liked in winter. She smiled when I walked in. Long night. That smile almost broke me. I looked at her standing there making coffee like nothing in the world was wrong, and for one dangerous second I nearly shoved the papers across the counter and demanded answers. But I didn't. Something told me not to. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Instead, I nodded and said transmission issue outside Terry Oat. She walked over and kissed my cheek. I made eggs. I remember thinking, how can somebody look this normal while my entire life is coming apart? That morning, I started investigating quietly. Not dramatic detective stuff, real-life middle-aged man investigation. Phone calls. Records offices. Long waits in uncomfortable chairs under fluorescent lights. I drove downtown to the Indiana Secretary of State office first, then the county recorder's office after lunch. Spent hours pulling business filings connected to Tyler's freight brokerage company. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. LLCs I'd never heard of. Financial guarantees linked to my trucking company. Loan authorizations carrying my name. One filing listed my warehouse property as collateral. That nearly made me dizzy. I walked outside into 38-degree rain and just stood there beside a parking meter, breathing hard. 30 years. 30 years building something carefully, and this kid nearly tied it to fraudulent loans in under 6 months. I called an old friend that afternoon. Janice Miller, retired trucking compliance officer. Smartest paperwork person I ever met. We'd worked together years earlier during a Department of Transportation audit that nearly buried half the small carriers in Indiana. Janice could spot inconsistencies faster than most attorneys. When I explained things, she got very quiet. Then she said, "Bring me everything." I drove to her condo in Greenwood, carrying 2 banker boxes full of records. She spent nearly 4 hours reviewing documents at her dining room table, while old jazz music played softly in the background. Every now and then she'd sigh or shake her head. That scared me more than yelling would have. Finally, she removed her glasses and looked straight at me. "Richard, these aren't mistakes." I already knew that. Still hurt hearing it out loud. Then she slid several papers across the table. "Look here. Witness signatures. Notary acknowledgments. Verification confirmations." And there it was. Denise's signature. Again. And again. And again. 4 separate loan packets. My wife had signed as witness on documents connected to loans I never approved. I actually felt cold sitting there. Not angry at first. Cold. Like somebody opened a door inside my chest during winter. Janice asked softly, did she know what these were? I stared at Denise's handwriting for a long moment before answering. "She's not stupid." That sentence sat heavily between us. I left Janice's place around sunset and drove west on I-70 with no radio on. Just road noise and windshield wipers. At some point, I pulled into a pilot truck stop near Plainfield because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat alone in the diner section drinking terrible coffee while drivers came and went around me. Nobody noticed me, which was good, because I think I looked close to falling apart. Across the room, 2 younger truckers laughed about football while a waitress refilled coffee cups. Normal life kept moving while mine felt like it had been shoved off a cliff. I kept thinking about Denise signing those papers. Not Tyler. Her. Tyler, I understood. Selfish people exist everywhere. But Denise knew what 30 years of work looked like. She saw the missed holidays. The surgeries I delayed because freight contracts had to be covered. The winters I came home barely able to straighten my back. She knew what that company cost me, and she still helped put it at risk. That was the part I couldn't make peace with. I sat there so long the waitress finally asked if I wanted pie. I almost laughed. Not tonight. Around 9 that evening, Janice called again. "Richard, there's more." Those 4 words aged me 5 years immediately. Turns out one of Tyler's lenders was already connected to a federal investigation involving fake freight invoices and shell transportation companies. Commercial loan fraud, tax issues, identity misuse. The kind of stuff that drags innocent people into nightmares if their names appear on paperwork. "You need an attorney," Janice said flatly. "I can't afford some giant legal battle." "You can't afford not to." She was right. But honestly, the money wasn't even my biggest fear anymore. It was shame. People underestimate how powerful embarrassment becomes after 50. You start worrying about reputation more than ego. Neighbors talking, drivers whispering, your daughter hearing rumors. I remember sitting in my truck outside my warehouse afterward, staring at the dark loading bays. For a moment, just one moment, I considered paying the debt, selling trucks, draining retirement savings, ending the nightmare quietly. Maybe Denise would stay. Maybe life could go back to normal. Then my phone buzzed. Tyler had posted another video online. Designer sunglasses. Luxury hotel somewhere in Miami. Talking about building generational wealth. That phrase hit me like gasoline on fire. Generational wealth. I looked around my freezing warehouse lot at the trucks I'd spent decades paying off. The company I built while missing birthdays and funerals and sleep. And suddenly something inside me hardened. Because Tyler didn't build anything. He consumed things. Big difference. The next morning I met with a business attorney named Carl Bennett in Indianapolis. Older guy, calm voice, wore suspenders. After reviewing everything, he leaned back slowly. You understand this may move beyond civil court. I figured. You also understand your wife may have exposure here. That one hurt. I nodded anyway. Carl suggested he formally represent me, but I told him something strange. I need the judge to hear this from me. He studied me a second, then finally nodded. All right, he said, but we prepare carefully. For the next several weeks, I gathered everything. Fuel receipts, dispatch logs, GPS records, loan timelines, emails, business filings, motel timestamps. Every piece of paper became another brick in the wall separating truth from lies. One document especially mattered. A loan authorization supposedly signed by me in Indianapolis. Problem was, on that exact day I was in Nebraska delivering agricultural equipment outside Lincoln. And unlike Tyler truckers document everything. DOT logs, fuel receipts, motel check-ins, timestamp dispatch records. The evidence didn't just prove I was innocent. It proved somebody assumed I'd never fight back. One night around midnight, I sat alone in my office organizing the final binder, while freezing rain hit the warehouse windows. 23 trucks sat quietly outside under yellow security lights. My entire life. Right there. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped feeling afraid. I started feeling angry. The morning of the hearing, Indianapolis looked exactly how you'd expect in late February. Gray sky, cold drizzle, dirty snow piled along curbs like wet cement. I parked in the courthouse garage just before 8 and sat inside my truck for a minute, watching rain slide down the windshield. My hands were steady. That surprised me. For weeks I'd imagined this day ending badly, losing the company, losing retirement, maybe even losing my reputation permanently. But something changes in a man once he's already accepted the worst possibility. Fear loses some of its grip. I grabbed the thick black binder from the passenger seat and headed inside. The courthouse smelled like burnt coffee, wet coats, and old paper. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard handcuffs clink lightly, followed by a deputy telling someone to keep moving. Real courthouse sounds. Not television. I found courtroom 4B halfway down the hall. Tyler was already there. Navy suit. Expensive haircut. Silver watch peeking from beneath his cuff. Trying very hard to look calm. But I noticed something immediately. His shoes weren't polished. Scuffed near the toes. Maybe that sounds small, but people falling apart always miss little things first. Denise sat beside him wearing a cream-colored sweater I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago. She looked exhausted, eyes swollen, fingers twisting nervously around a tissue. When she finally glanced at me, it lasted maybe half a second. Then she looked away again. That hurt more than yelling probably would have. Tyler's attorney approached me before the hearing started. Tall guy, expensive suit, hair slicked back too perfectly. Mr. Hale, he said quietly, there's still time to resolve this privately. Meaning, pay quietly, protect family appearances, swallow the damage. I almost did it. That's the truth nobody likes admitting. For about 5 seconds standing there beneath flickering courthouse lights while strangers shuffled papers around me, I seriously considered surrendering. At my age, peace starts sounding more valuable than pride. Then I remembered Denise signing those documents. And Tyler smiling beside a rented Lamborghini online while using my company name as collateral. No, I said simply. The lawyer gave a disappointed little nod like a salesman losing commission. Very well. We entered the courtroom a few minutes later. Old wooden benches. Buzzing fluorescent lights. The judge looked tired before we even began. Tyler's side went first. Their entire argument depended on one idea. That I knowingly backed Tyler's business ventures, then changed my mind after the debt became overwhelming. The attorney presented printed text messages, selective emails, claims about verbal promises, family loyalty. He painted Tyler as an ambitious young businessman abandoned by a cold stepfather protecting his money. I'll admit something uncomfortable. For a little while, it worked. Even sitting there listening, I could feel how the story sounded from the outside. Older man, successful business owner. Stepson struggling financially. Family dispute over money. Simple. Believable. The judge asked me several questions directly. I answered calmly, but inside I could feel pressure building behind my ribs. Then Denise testified. That nearly broke me. Not because she yelled. Because she sounded sincere. Quiet voice, tearful eyes. Richard always treated Tyler like family, she said softly. The room went still. He wanted Tyler involved in the trucking business. He believed in him. Part of that was true, which made it worse. Because real lies usually hide inside partial truths. She looked toward me briefly before continuing. I think things just got out of control. Out of control. Like this whole disaster was weather nobody caused. I stared down at the table while she spoke, because if I looked directly at her too long, I honestly don't know what expression would have crossed my face. Anger. Grief. Humiliation. Probably all three. When her testimony ended, Tyler's attorney looked confident again. Then the judge turned toward me. Mr. Hale. I stood slowly. My knees actually cracked loud enough for the front row to hear. One deputy smirked slightly. Fair enough. I carried my binder to the front table and opened it carefully. No dramatic speeches. No shouting. I was too tired for theatrics. I'd like to address one document first, I said. I handed copies to the judge, opposing counsel, and court clerk. Commercial loan authorization. Dated October 14th. Signed supposedly by me in Indianapolis. The attorney nodded immediately. Yes, one of several guarantees. I looked at him. No, I said calmly, it's fraud. The attorney sighed like he'd heard this before. Then I opened another section of the binder. October 14th, I continued I was in Nebraska delivering agricultural equipment outside Lincoln. The judge looked up slightly. I kept going. Page 12 contains my Department of Transportation logbook. Page 13 shows fuel purchases in Kearney, Nebraska. Page 14 is motel check-in confirmation, time-stamped 9:18 p.m. The courtroom got quieter with every sentence. I handed another page forward. Dispatch GPS records are highlighted in yellow. Tyler shifted in his chair for the first time. His attorney flipped pages faster now. I wasn't finished. Page 22 contains a notarized filing connected to Hale Transport Logistics, I said. The judge studied the page silently, then looked toward Tyler's attorney. Counselor, why is this filing tied to an active commercial fraud investigation? That changed the room immediately. The attorney froze. Just for a second. But everybody noticed. Especially me. Tyler stopped looking confident after that. He started whispering aggressively toward his lawyer, while Denise gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then I handed over the emails. That was the part Denise never expected me to find. Messages between her and Tyler discussing paperwork. Nothing openly criminal. But enough. Enough to show manipulation. One line especially stood out. Don't overload him with details after work. He signs faster when he's tired. The judge read that line twice. Slowly. Nobody moved. Not even Tyler. Outside rain tapped softly against courthouse windows while somebody coughed near the back row. The attorney tried recovering. Your Honor, these emails are being interpreted unfairly. The judge raised one hand. Silence. Then he removed his glasses carefully and looked down at the documents spread across his bench. I remember hearing the dry sound of paper sliding beneath his fingers. Small sound. But in that moment it felt heavier than shouting. Finally, he looked toward the court officer near the door. "I want non-essential personnel cleared from this courtroom," he said calmly. Then his eyes shifted toward the lending representative seated behind Tyler's attorney. "You will remain available for further questioning." Nobody spoke. Tyler's face had completely lost color now. And Denise looked at me the way people look at storms they suddenly realize are real. The mood inside that courtroom changed so completely it almost felt like the temperature dropped. A few minutes earlier, Tyler had been sitting there leaning back confidently, like this whole hearing was some annoying inconvenience. Now he couldn't sit still. His leg bounced under the table hard enough to shake his chair. The deputies cleared out the extra spectators quietly. Two people from another hearing gathered their coats and left looking confused. The heavy courtroom doors shut behind them with a dull thud. Then the room got very small. Just the judge, court staff, attorneys, the lenders, me, Denise, Tyler, and suddenly nobody seemed comfortable anymore. The judge spent several long minutes reviewing documents silently, while the only sounds came from paper turning and rain hitting the windows outside. Tyler's attorney finally cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I think we're drifting beyond the scope of the original civil matter." The judge looked up immediately. "Counselor, if fraudulent representations were submitted to this court, that becomes very much my concern." Nobody argued after that. One of the lender representatives, heavy-set guy in a charcoal suit, started sweating visibly. He kept loosening his tie and asking for water. The judge questioned him first. Simple questions. Who reviewed the guarantees? Who verified identity? Why were business assets tied to Hale Transport Logistics without direct confirmation from ownership? The man stumbled through every answer. I sat quietly watching years of pressure finally shift away from my shoulders inch by inch. Not disappear. Just move. Toward the people who created it. Then the judge turned toward Tyler. "Mr. Bennett," he said evenly, "did you personally witness Mr. Hale sign these documents?" Tyler swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." That lie came out too fast. The judge slid forward the Nebraska records. "Interesting," he said calmly, "because according to Department of Transportation logs, fuel purchases, dispatch GPS records, and motel timestamps, Mr. Hale was approximately 800 miles away." Silence. Absolute silence. I watched Tyler's face carefully right then. That was the exact moment panic truly hit him. Not fear of losing money. Fear of consequences. Real consequences. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently now. Denise looked like she might faint. Then the lender attorney made a mistake. He tried blaming me. "With respect, Your Honor, Mr. Hale clearly exercised poor oversight regarding his business documentation." That sentence irritated me more than I expected. 30 years. 30 years keeping drivers paid through recessions, fuel spikes, breakdowns, and COVID shutdowns. I missed funerals for that company. Missed birthdays. Spent winters sleeping in freezing truck cabs so bills got paid on time. And now some man who'd probably never chained tires in sleet wanted to call me irresponsible. Before I could answer, the judge did it for me. "Poor oversight," he repeated coldly, "is not the same thing as identity fraud." That shut the room up immediately. Tyler started breathing harder after that. You could actually hear it. Denise reached for his arm. "Tyler." He pulled away sharply. And that's when the entire thing finally collapsed. "Mom said he'd cave," Tyler snapped suddenly. He always caves when things get uncomfortable. The words echoed louder than he probably intended. Even he realized it immediately. Too late. Denise closed her eyes like she'd just been slapped. The judge leaned back slowly in his chair. "Well," he said quietly, "that's illuminating." Tyler's attorney looked ready to crawl under the table. I didn't feel victorious hearing it. That's important to understand. People imagine revenge feels exciting. Most of the time it just feels sad. Because once the truth finally arrives, you're still left staring at people you once loved. The judge continued reviewing documents another several minutes while nobody dared speak unnecessarily. Then he focused on Denise. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "did you witness your husband knowingly authorize these loans?" Denise looked toward Tyler first. That told me everything. Finally, she answered softly. I thought he understood more than he did." The judge's expression hardened immediately. That was not my question. She started crying then, quietly at first. The kind of crying older people do when they're trying not to completely lose control in public. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I just felt tired. Deep tired. The kind that settles behind your ribs. The judge suspended the hearing shortly afterward. He stated clearly that evidence presented raised serious concerns regarding falsified financial filings, potential identity fraud, improper collateralization, and possible violations connected to ongoing commercial lending investigations. The matter would be referred for additional review. No dramatic arrests happen. Real life usually isn't that cinematic. Nobody got dragged out in handcuffs. But the shift was obvious. The lenders suddenly stopped looking at me like the problem and started looking at Tyler. That alone changed everything. As court staff gathered documents, Tyler sat motionless, staring at the table. No confidence left. No entrepreneur swagger. Just a scared 31-year-old realizing the internet lifestyle he built might actually collapse in the real world. Funny thing, for months I'd imagined screaming at him if I ever got the chance. In reality, I barely wanted to look at him anymore. Denise finally stood slowly beside the table. She looked smaller somehow, older. The hearing had drained something out of her. As people began filing toward the hallway, she touched my sleeve gently for the first time in weeks. Richard, I stopped walking. Not because I wanted to, because 11 years doesn't disappear instantly. She looked up at me with swollen eyes. I never thought it would go this far. I studied her face for a long second. And honestly, I believed her. That was the tragedy of it. I don't think Denise planned to destroy my life from the beginning. I think she spent years protecting Tyler, one bad decision at a time, until she couldn't tell right from wrong anymore. Parents can do that sometimes, especially when guilt gets mixed with love. But understanding somebody doesn't erase damage. I gently removed her hand from my sleeve. Not angrily, just carefully. Then I walked away. The parking garage outside the courthouse smelled like wet concrete and motor oil. Rain hammered against the ramps overhead, while traffic hissed through downtown streets beyond the entrance. I stood beside my truck for a long moment without getting in. No phone calls. No demands. No lenders threatening lawsuits. Just rain. And silence. For the first time in nearly a year, nobody needed something from me. And I realized how long it had been since I felt that. About 8 months after the hearing, I sold truck number 14, old Freightliner Cascadia. 860,000 miles on it. Transmission needed work again, and honestly, 10 years earlier, I probably would have rebuilt the thing myself just to keep another truck running. But by then, I was tired of fighting every battle. That's one thing nobody tells you about getting older. Peace starts becoming more valuable than expansion. More valuable than proving yourself. So I downsized. Sold 8 trucks total over that summer. Cut back routes. Kept only the contracts that actually made money instead of the ones that just kept me stressed and awake at night. A few drivers moved on. The loyal ones stayed. Manny stayed. That mattered to me more than he probably realized. I moved into a smaller place outside Plainfield not long after the divorce finalized. Nothing fancy. Small backyard, quiet neighborhood, a garage barely big enough for my fishing gear and tools. First night there felt strange. No television noise from another room. No footsteps upstairs. No tension either. Just silence. Funny thing about silence, it can feel lonely or peaceful depending on what you just escaped from. For me, it slowly became peaceful. The legal mess kept moving without me needing to chase it anymore. Tyler ended up facing multiple financial investigations tied to the lenders and fraudulent filings. Last I heard, his attorneys were trying to negotiate charges down before trial. I didn't follow it closely. I stopped wanting updates after a while. There's a point where anger burns itself out and leaves behind something quieter. Exhaustion maybe, or acceptance. Probably both. Denise emailed several times over those months, usually late at night. You can tell a lot about somebody by the hour they choose to apologize. Her messages were long, emotional, sometimes confusing. One blamed Tyler's manipulation. Another blamed herself. One simply said, "I miss our old life." That one sat with me a while, because I missed parts of it too. That's the uncomfortable truth people don't like hearing in stories like this. Bad relationships aren't bad every minute. If they were, nobody would stay. I never replied to the emails. Not because I hated her, because I finally understood something important. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Around September, Denise called unexpectedly while I was sitting outside a bait shop near Eagle Creek Reservoir. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Tyler had drained most of her savings by then trying to cover legal expenses and debts. She was leaving the house. Needed help securing an apartment. For a second, old instincts kicked in immediately. Fix it. Rescue everybody. Keep peace. That reflex had controlled half my adult life. But this time felt different. I told her I'd help with the deposit for a modest apartment. One time, no arguments, no conditions. She cried quietly over the phone. Why would you still help me after everything? I remember staring out across the gray water before answering. Because helping somebody once is different than carrying them forever. Long silence after that. Then she whispered, I'm sorry, Richard. And for the first time since all this started, I think she truly meant it. I helped her move 2 weeks later. Small apartment on the west side of Indianapolis. Nothing terrible. Nothing special either. Mostly empty rooms and tired carpeting. We carried boxes upstairs, mostly in silence. At one point, she stopped in the kitchen holding an old frame photo from our first vacation together in Tennessee. You remember this cabin? She asked softly. I did. Smoky Mountains. Rainstorm. Cheap whiskey on the porch. Back when life still felt simple. She looked at me carefully. We could still fix things. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Because part of me wanted to believe it. 11 years is a long time to erase. But some damage changes shape permanently once trust disappears. I shook my head gently. No, I said, I don't think we can. She cried quietly after that, while I carried the last box inside. And strangely enough, I didn't feel anger walking away. Just sadness. Clean sadness. The kind that finally tells the truth after years of excuses. Life settled into routine after that. Mornings at the diner off Route 40. Coffee with truckers before sunrise. Fishing on weekends. Less money coming in, maybe, but less pressure too. One October morning, a younger driver named Caleb sat across from me at breakfast, asking questions about financing equipment for his first independent route. Good kid, 27 maybe. Ambitious without being arrogant. I listened a while before telling him something I wish somebody had told me years earlier. Never mix guilt with money, I said. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. If somebody makes you feel guilty for protecting what you worked your whole life to build, be careful. He nodded like he understood part of it. Maybe one day he will fully. That afternoon, I drove one of the older trucks west on I-70 just to clear my head. Windows cracked slightly. Cool autumn air. Country radio playing low through worn speakers. Fields stretched gold beneath the sunset, while semis rolled steadily across the interstate beside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing toward another crisis. Wasn't trying to rescue somebody. Wasn't carrying people who refused to carry themselves. I thought about Tyler. About Denise. About all the moments I ignored my instincts because I was afraid of losing people. Truth is, some people don't leave because you stop helping them. They leave because helping them was the only thing keeping the relationship alive. That realization took me nearly 60 years to learn. As the sun dropped lower across the Indiana fields, I rested one hand on the steering wheel and listened to the steady hum of the engine beneath me. Same sound that carried me through most of my life. And somewhere out there between Indianapolis and the fading orange horizon, I realized something simple. I didn't win anything back that year. I just finally stopped losing myself. If you're listening to this in your 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s, and somebody in your life only seems to call when they need money, help, or rescue, I hope you remember this. Love should not cost you your peace. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves out there.